I want to welcome everybody to Braincast number 13. This is Dr. Drew Edwards and Dr. Sean Orr from the Neurogenesis Project, and we want to thank you for joining us today. How are you doing, Drew?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited. We have some new news out about Alzheimer's disease and cognitive risks.
We love finding research and sending it to each other and see. So I'm really excited to ask you about this, and it has to do with some new findings with how diet increases or decreases the risk for Alzheimer's. But based on your genetics, and of course we do genetic testing with all our patients, and most people do not. And so this is exciting for us. We feel vindicated a little bit.
Well, it's hard not to see, some division going on, right? All you need to do is surf Instagram for a little while to realize there are some people who are extremely pro-vegetarian and some that are extremely pro-carnivorous diets. And really, we haven't had a lot of guidance in terms of, like what's good for the brain, right? And we have, there are diets that have evidence around them, like the Mediterranean diet and the brain diet, the mind diet. But this new study out, I think it really helps us to be able to give more specific guidance to our patients, don't you think?
I do. And what we're talking about is a March 2026 study that was in the journal, JAMA. And it really, it was a cohort study of over 2,100 older adults without dementia. Higher total meat consumption was associated with slower cognitive decline and reduced dementia risk among older adults. And there's some stuff, there's some genetic risk factors and markers that go into this, but it really, sorry, my phone rang. Start that again.
No problem.
So what we're talking about is a March 2026, this month, JAMA study, which looked at over 2,100 adults without dementia, and it also measured their total meat consumption. And we're talking about, I'll get into the meat types later. And meat consumption was associated with a slower cognitive decline and reduced risk of dementia among older adults. The genetics and the genotype and the interactions I'm going to let Dr. Orr talk about in a minute. But this is really exciting news because not one diet works for everybody. We've heard of the Mediterranean diet, kind of like when all else fails, do the Mediterranean. Well, that can actually not be helpful for some people, and some diets could be harmful for some people based on their genetics. And that
was one of the most surprising outcomes from this study, and we'll share the content of the study with our viewers here. But really, I think it kind of gets to the idea of precision medicine, right? And it was Hippocrates who said, let your food be your medicine, let your medicine be your food. And, here we are 2,000 years later and still fighting over what constitutes the right kind of food to be medicine.
Right.
So I think this study is really great because it gives us some really good guidance about who would benefit from what kinds of food based on their genetic type, right?
Yeah.
So I think for our viewers, it's important to understand, first of all, that dementia is an overall category of cognitive loss from a previously held level, right? So some forms of dementia are reversible. And even the most common form of dementia, which is Alzheimer's disease, looks like we're getting to a point where we can almost say that we are able to reverse the effects of Alzheimer's disease. And that's a really incredible thing. When I first started out as a neurologist in my early days of training, maybe at best we could slow down the gradual decline, right? But now we're at a point where I think we can say we possibly can actually turn around the disease process. And
exactly.
Yeah, maybe we're looking at a near future where we might possibly say we can cure Alzheimer's, which is really exciting. So dementia, there are many different types, and so we probably don't need to get into all those details. Our viewers can check out our other videos on this concept. But when it comes to all forms of dementia, this study looked at really the genetics that is the most predictive for Alzheimer's is really what we call the E4 allele. So what does that mean? It turns out that our bodies and our brains handle cholesterol transport in different ways based on your genetics. And one of these genes that we measure is apolipoprotein E, or APOE is the abbreviation for short. And there are 4 variants on this gene. So people out there in the world can have APOE1, E2, E3, or E4. It's really epsilon 1, 2, 3, and 4 if we want to be precise. So it turns out that people who carry everybody has 2 copies of this gene, one from mom and one from dad. And people who carry at least 1 copy of the E4 gene are at an increased risk of dementia. So 1 copy can increase your risk about 5 times. 2 copies will increase your risk about 10 to 15 times greater than people who don't have those E4 genes. So we're going to give our viewers an infographic also before we're done. You'll see that come up here, but it'll just walk you through the idea that having the E4 gene increases your risk of developing Alzheimer's type dementia. So in this study, the authors were, I think they were prompted by this idea of the fact that from an evolutionary standpoint, the E4 gene seems to be the oldest in humans. Like the oldest humans that we could identify had the E4 gene, and then along the way, other humans through successive generations developed different genes. But for some reason, that E4 seemed to be the oldest. And the question was, is it possible that people who have the E4 gene would benefit from eating the way that our cavemen ancestors ate, right? I mean, how many of those guys would go to 7-Eleven and get a bologna sandwich? They didn't exist, right? They'd have to go find a bird or some kind of a mammal to hunt and kill and eat as fresh meat. So I think the hypothesis of the study was motivated by this interesting idea that our ancestors who had the E4 allele probably would have done best eating just meat, not vegetables as much, right?
Right.
And I think, don't you think this is kind of what the study bears out? It proves that hypothesis.
It does, and it breaks it down into and to be clear, processed meat doesn't count as meat in this thing. So the people who love deli food, if you got the E4, you probably need to give up the deli because that's the highest risk factor. It increases your risk because deli meat is processed, a lot of other stuff in it, plus fat, and it's the other stuff, the preservatives and all the things they use that can cause inflammation and inflammatory response in the gut and up to the brain eventually. So our advice is to stay away from that if you're positive. But how do you know, Dr. Orr, how would people know?
Yeah, so
this is risk factor.
Great question. Our patients who come to see us for cognitive problems, we routinely test them. We test their genetics for this dementia marker, among others. But this is really probably the most foundational genetic marker that's been available on the market for the longest time. It's easily done through a cheek swab, and we send off the kit to a lab for testing. A lot of people find genetic testing is fraught with all sorts of questions. Is my data going to be safe? What happens if people discover that I have this gene type? But the good news is that without getting into it too much here, there are laws in the books here, federal laws that protect people from bias by insurance companies and the medical infrastructure from using these information against them. So we're big proponents of doing genetic testing for a variety of reasons. When we see people with traumatic brain injury or addiction problems, genetic testing can be extremely helpful in determining overall risk and how we fine tune our care, right?
Right. So and just to piggyback off of that comment, so a lot of people who go to specialists for variety, they'll get sort of a shotgun approach. And I'm troubled to say this, but it's based on what the insurance company will allow them to prescribe and what they'll pay for, which isn't the best way, in our opinion, to practice medicine.
Mhm.
And so I'll give you an example of selective reuptake serotonin inhibitors for depression and suicidality. Basically, general psychiatry, if you go in with that, they'll just put you on one of those if they clinically assess that you're depressed, and you'll get serotonin. Well, there's a certain percent of the population that has too much serotonin, and if you give them selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you make them worse. And we've had that. We've run into that a couple of times, and because of that, they were referred to us for what we call a deep dive into their chemistry, into their genetics, and we were able to determine that type of medication is the absolutely worst thing you should give them, and we need to give them something different. And when we've done that, we've been able to help people. So that precision-based medicine is based on finding a target, finding how that patient is unique genetically and what are their life experiences, and then target an area that we think we can help biologically, and then through support and counseling and coaching and that thing. But initially, it's looking at the brain and how we can strengthen the brain from these types of risk factors that make them worse.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think you said something earlier before when we were preparing for this, which I thought really kind of got to the crux of this study, which is that well-intentioned practitioners who might advise something like the Mediterranean diet could actually be doing damage to people. Right. We didn't know this before. We just blanket said, Mediterranean diet's good for everybody. Yet here we have this, enormous population of people with dementia, and it's really a tidal wave just washing over our globe of people with neurodegenerative diseases. So the big question is, is the Mediterranean diet the best for everybody? And it turns out that it's not. This study actually shows that of the people that ate the most meat, so they divided their subjects into 5 different categories, which are called quintiles. So the 20% were the bottom in terms of how much meat they were consuming on a daily basis, and then 20%, 20%, 20%, and then the top 20%. So the people who ate in the top 20% of people who ate meat, and that's, again, beef, chicken, fish is included in this as well, not processed meats. People in the top 20% basically erased their risk that comes with that gene from the E4 allele. That's amazing. We don't have a medication that does that. No. We don't have any kind of strategy right now that has as powerful an effect as that one simple dietary modification. So how does this change what we do with patients? Well, in our practice, it really doesn't, but globally, it probably should. Let me take a step back. We test our patients routinely for the genetics, but this is going to actually probably reinforce the importance of it for people who are on the borderline of whether they should get tested or not. Because then the next change is that we are going to start recommending, and short of any new data coming out to say to the contrary, but I think we will probably start to recommend that our patients consume more red meat and chicken if they have 1 or 2 copies of the E4 gene allele.
Sure.
Now,
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to just kind of play off that idea for a minute about the red meat, because I can just imagine we're going to have people who protest here and have all sorts of problems with that. I think there's a neat little trick that I like to recommend even before this study came out when it comes to red meat. Because the big question is, why is red meat so problematic in the first place? Well, it turns out that when we eat protein, our gut bacteria break protein down into amino acids. Sometimes those amino acids get broken down into something called TMAO. That stands for trimethylamine oxide for short. Now, TMAO is a byproduct of gut bacteria breakdown of proteins, and it's very toxic to neurons, and it's toxic to the cells that line the arteries. So when you think about red meat increasing the risk of heart disease and stroke, that's your link right there, the TMAO. But the good news is that we can actually neutralize that byproduct by increasing our consumption of something called butyrate. And butyrate is richly found in olive oil and in balsamic vinegar, and other similar kinds of food products. So this is maybe where the Mediterranean diet gets some of its, packs some of its punch in the neutralization of triethylamine oxide.
Sure.
So I think that, we do routinely measure that in our patients as well. We just had a patient who came in not long ago who was developing a dementia. He's in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and we found his TMAO levels were sky high. And literally within the first 3 weeks of making some big changes to his diet, he's already improved by about 80%. So it's pretty remarkable to see how the clinical application of that one change of adding butyrate can make a big difference. So
if you think about risk reward of people who are worried about genetic testing for all the ways you enumerated, but the cost of not finding this out about yourself is too high. If you, for example, if you have people in your family history of dementia or Alzheimer's, you probably should be tested. And because if we find this out in your early life, your 30s, we can begin to modify diet and exercise and really prevent and erase some of this risk for you, if not all of it. Even if you have that genetic predisposition that puts you at incredible risk for Alzheimer's. Nobody wants this disease. This is a debilitating, awful disease to have. So, and a lot of people know this already, but no one, the humans, we have a great way of denying it's ever going to happen to us. We have this way, it happens to everybody else, but not to me, but it does happen. And these patients, we've had a couple of patients who we've done some very specific targeted treatment with diet and some other things, even next stem cells and things like that we can do that really can reverse some of this stuff, or turn back the clock anyway. And so it's an exciting time. There's no good time to have Alzheimer's, but this would be the best time so far if you're going to get it, because we can do something about it now.
Well, and when you bring up stem cells, it provokes me to think about, what is APOE actually doing in the brain, and inflammation really is the core issue there. And this is the kind of stem cells that we use are right now, they're called mesenchymal stem cells, and they actually have a very powerful anti-inflammatory effect. So, by the time you get to using that kind of a strategy to help support brain function, we've already gone through about 6 or 7 other hurdles. And I'm really excited to see, a lot of the neuronutrients that we use for our patients, things like turmeric, et cetera, do make a big difference for that neuroinflammation. I'm thinking especially in the people who are APOE4 carriers. But now that we have this data to rely on, I as a practitioner, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable recommending, a high meat diet to people who have the APOE4 gene.
Sure.
And we'll see. I'm sure more research is going to come out around this subject, and maybe we'll be, backtracking down the road if this is all proved to be wrong. But it's pretty solid data. So we'll put that up for our viewers to analyze and we surely will have to hear your comments and, your own experience with dietary modification. Does any of you out there have a relative or even yourself who has cognitive changes that are scary or concerning? Have any of you changed your diet and found that you've had a benefit from that?
Right.
So please feel free to like and subscribe to this video. Subscribe to our page. It really would help us to get found in the algorithm, so our information can help more people. But we really love your comments and questions. And this is such a loaded topic when it comes to, everybody has an opinion about what the right approach is. I think this really helps to narrow down a better approach.
That is, our patients who we see, and they learn to believe real quickly that we have a very evidence-based approach to this. We look for the biology, how can this be explained through your genetics, through your biology, through how fast you metabolize things like neurotransmitters and all kinds of nutrients. And everyone's different. And that uniqueness has been lost sort of, I think, in the sort of this medicine, this industrial complex we call managed care medicine. I think we're losing that. And we see people coming in after they've been to X amount of specialists who didn't do any of this because they were hindered by doing it because of the way the payer system works. So people get mad at me for saying this, but managed care is great until you get sick. And when you get sick, you'll find out it's not going to help you that much if you have a serious problem. And I'll get some mail.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I think we're speaking truth to our experience, right?
Yeah. Personal and with our clients. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think the question was asked, I think you asked me this earlier, if somebody's listening and they're worried about their Alzheimer's risk, what's the single most important step they can take this week? I think, knowing what your risk is going to be the most important thing you can do. So, that may mean doing some testing. And certainly there are plenty of, online resources for where you can do, cognitive testing. We like to use the Braincast platform ourselves. But then, getting genetic testing really can be very helpful because it really could make a meaningful difference in your life to know, so that if and when you're ready to make dietary changes, you're making the right changes instead of going in the wrong direction and maybe doing damage. So
could you elaborate on when someone says that it was a clinical diagnosis of things like Alzheimer's or ALS or Parkinson's? Help our audience understand what that really is.
Sure.
In contrast with what we're doing.
Well, I mean, the gold standard for diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is an autopsy. And that's the worst way to be diagnosed with anything.
We don't want to help you that way.
No. I mean, it's by the time you're getting to that point, there's nothing you can do about it. And so it has been, a decades-long pursuit for us to really understand what is going on inside the brain that will lead people down a path of cognitive decline and demise and extended disability for many years, if not decades.
Right.
So the clinical diagnosis is the best that we could do by evaluating a patient and using our best judgment. I, as a doctor, will evaluate a patient, examine them, test them, look at their history, do a neurological examination, do some cognitive testing. And if it seems like their pattern of cognitive decline fits into the bucket of Alzheimer's disease, then probably, the clinical diagnosis is appropriate. The problem with that is that it turns out that there are things that mimic Alzheimer's disease that look a lot like it. For example, normal pressure hydrocephalus. There's a big overlap between people who have Alzheimer's and hydrocephalus. And so this is a condition where it's treatable and in many patients reversible, and they can actually enjoy an extended quality of life for many years, if not decades, if they get treated properly. There's a big subset of people who turn out they have an autoimmune syndrome that causes antibodies to attack the memory centers of the brain. That's not Alzheimer's disease, but it sure looks a whole lot like it. And that's just been defined in the last 3 or 4 years. So really getting a precision diagnosis can open the doors to therapy that wouldn't normally be considered, right? And
Yes.
So rather than engaging in what we call empiric therapy, which is let's just try something and see if it works, we can do precision therapy, which means we have a much greater idea of the pathology that's going on, and therefore we're going to use solutions for that problem and keep iterating until we know for sure that that's working properly. So maybe that's, clinical diagnosis now means rather than just using our best intuition, we're informed by other data that helps us to improve the precision of our diagnosis.
So we look for blood work and looking for biomarkers, and we look for genetics. We're looking for neurotransmitter function. We're looking at a lot of different things that you wouldn't get because they cost money. And the standard has been, like you said, a clinical diagnosis is you examine them, get a little history, give them a cognitive test, and say, yeah, they have some dementia, and I think it's Alzheimer's. That's inadequate.
Yeah.
Because based on what we just talked about, there's things you can do now if we know that you have that A4 allele, and you wouldn't know that unless you looked for it, right?
Yep.
So
we're going through a massive culture shift right now in medicine. And I like to make the distinction between medicine and healthcare. They're two different things. Healthcare is the delivery system that includes medicine, for better or for worse, and oftentimes tries to distort the way that medicine is practiced. The reason I make that distinction is because as a medical doctor, I have the choice to decide to show up for work or not. How am I going to show up for my patients? I want to show up in the best possible way in the environment which I know is going to be the most conducive to their healing and support them. And if that means working in a system that's built to deny their care, I just can't, personally, I can't live with that. So as an independent doctor, I have the freedom to decide what I'm going to present to my patients. And that means the whole spectrum of options, right? So a lot of times I'll be seeing a patient, you and I will be interviewing a patient and tell me if this resonates with you or not, but they'll tell us, this is the first time I'm hearing about this, or why didn't anybody ask me these questions before? Or my doctor told me that this is normal aging, and there's nothing to be done, right? We hear that all the time.
All the time.
I think what's going on is that there are many doctors who are either burned out, or don't have enough time, or they've been trained by the system that they just don't have the time to help these patients. Right. And really what that does then, it puts the onus on, or the burden on the patient to do their homework to figure out what's the best way to deal with this problem. And when it comes to Alzheimer's, it's tricky because one of the first things that happens that gets lost is self-awareness. Right.
They don't know it. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. We talk about anosognosia all the time. So the lack of awareness of their lack of awareness can lead to all sorts of problems with getting diagnosed in a timely fashion. So we'll refer to some of our other videos and give you folks links where you can learn more about that concept. But really, I think the culture shift that we're starting to see is now that people are using artificial intelligence, they're coming to us with answers, with expectations. Yep. It's actually a lot of fun. We had a patient that came in last week who he's suffering from 4 distinct neurological diseases, and it's brutal. She has just been really at the focus of, any one of them would be hard to live with, but with 4 of them, she's debilitated. But she went to ChatGPT, put in all her symptoms, and came out with about an inch long, thick stack of diagnostic testing and answers, which she didn't tell me about. And so we got through the whole encounter. It was about an hour and a half long, session of just asking questions, digging deep, trying to figure things out. And I laid it out for her, which I thought was a pretty good summary. And when I was done, she said, "You're right. I'm so relieved." I said, "What do you mean?"
Yes.
And she brought out her ChatGPT logs of pretty much how it came up with a pretty good summary of everything that we were talking about. It was a complex evaluation. I was glad to have met the standards of ChatGPT.
Yes.
I like to say, yeah, thank you. I think I probably did, but who knows how long that's going to continue. So I think it's a new day. Patients have a new level of expectation. They have new tools at their disposal. So we're really becoming facilitators and helping them to get the answers validated and then come up with our treatment program that we think works best for them. It's a constant shifting landscape. I think we're staying pretty well ahead of it. But yeah, it's an exciting time. So, and we encourage people who are listening, if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help. But I think the takeaway here is that they say you are what you eat, but how your brain processes that does make a difference based on your genetics, right?
It really does, and we just learned a lot through this one study and its summary, and it should change how we treat people. Time will tell, but it's going to change the way we treat people, because we've got a tool now that's preventative and it's also a treatment. So it's pretty nice to have both of those things.
Yeah. All right. Well, Drew, how can people find us?
Well, you can go on look up the Neurogenesis project, and that'll bring you to our website, which we're always kind of improving. And it looks pretty cool, by the way, thanks to a lot of your work. And that'll tell you about us and what we do and how to get a hold of us should you want to come in for a consult and or arrange for a phone call or something. We're happy to do that. But we're this sort of, it feels like we're a mom and pop shop with two pops, but we're very hands-on and we're very specific, and it's, people were amazed that we're talking to them for just about 40 minutes, and they go, I'm sitting there with two doctors talking for 40 minutes about my problem, and I usually get 4 minutes or something, or 4 or 5 minutes. And so we are the real deal. We're trying to really help you and understand you, and it doesn't help anybody if we don't understand your perspective on this and what your experience is. And that's gotten lost in modern medicine, if you said, or healthcare. And we're trying to do better. And our patients are happy that we're taking the time to get to know them a little better.
Yeah, we've had some great patients to work with. So
Amazing.
Great. Well, we'll put all of our links where people can reach us, but we're really interested in your comments and questions. So please feel free to let us know your thoughts, and we'll look forward to doing this again soon. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Dr. Orr.
Thanks, Dr. Edwards. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.